Kang Jae-hoon sat at the far end of the conference table, jacket draped over the back of his chair, collar open at the top button, one hand resting flat on a spread of documents as he worked through the numbers his team had prepared for the Singapore expansion. Min sat across from him, leaning back with the particular ease of someone who had been in enough high-stakes rooms to stop being impressed by them. The kind of ease that only came from years. The glass door opened. Zara moved the way she always moved, direct, unhurried, no motion wasted. She had a portfolio under one arm and her tablet in her other hand. She set the documents on the table in front of Jae-hoon without a word, caught his glance, and answered it with a single small nod that said the contract amendment is on top, initial where flagged. Then she turned and walked back out, pulling the glass door shut behind her with a soft, clean click. Jae-hoon had already reached for the top page. Min hadn't moved. He was still watching the door. "Your secretary," he said. Jae-hoon didn't look up. "What about her? She's striking." That made Jae-hoon look up. He studied Min for a moment the way he studied anything that didn't immediately make sense to him, briefly, directly, without warmth. "Are you serious?" "Completely." Min turned back to him, unbothered. "What's her name?" "Zara." Jae-hoon said it the way you said the name of a reliable piece of equipment. Accurate, unremarkable. "And I don't know what you're looking at. I have never seen Zara that way." He leaned back and set down his pen. "She is not my type. We are boss and employee. That's the entirety of it." Min raised an eyebrow. "Your type?" "Yes." Jae-hoon said it plainly, like the answer was self-evident. "You know the kind of women who come into a room like this. You've seen them. That's what I'm accustomed to." He paused, searching for the precise word, the honest one, the one that would close the conversation, and found it. "Zara is..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Min looked at him for a long moment with the expression of a man deciding whether to say the thing he was thinking. He decided against it, for now. On the other side of the glass door, Zara stood still. She had not meant to stop. She was on her way back to her desk, tablet already in hand, mind already sorted onto the next task. But she had slowed at the door when she heard her name, and then she had heard everything else. "I have never seen Zara that way. She is not my type." She didn't move for a moment. She was not sure when her chin had dropped, or when her hand had tightened around the tablet, or when the quiet hum of the office around her had started to feel very far away. She stood there a breath longer than she meant to. Then she straightened, squared her shoulders, tucked the tablet back under her arm, and walked back to her desk with the same unhurried, direct pace she always walked with. She sat down, opened her screen, stared at it. It wasn't as though she had expected something different. She was not naive about who Kang Jae-hoon was, or what his world looked like, or what kind of woman occupied his attention outside these walls. She had watched enough of that particular pattern over 4 years to have a detailed picture. She had always known she was not that. So why did hearing him say it so easily, so carelessly, in the voice of a man who had never once considered she might be within earshot, feel like something small and load-bearing giving way inside her chest? She pulled up her email. She opened a blank document. She had work to do. "If you're new here, welcome. Stay with this one. And if you've been here before, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. You're going to want to see where this goes." Zara Whitfield had been the first person in the building every morning for 4 years. Not because it was required. Her contract said 9. She arrived at 7:30 because 7:30 was when the overnight reports needed sorting, when Jae-hoon's schedule needed adjusting for whatever had shifted in Asian markets while the city slept, when the 15 small things that would quietly derail his day needed to be found and resolved before he walked through the door and found a world that simply worked. That was the job, not the version in the offer letter, the real one. The one she had built herself, quietly, over 4 years of learning exactly how Kang Jae-hoon moved through a day and positioning herself precisely where the gaps were before he noticed they existed. She knew which investors required a response within the hour and which could wait until morning without taking offense. She knew he read documents back to front when he was distracted and front to back when he was focused, and that you could tell the difference by whether he'd had coffee before 10. She knew which meetings would run long and pre-block the 30 minutes after. She knew, without being told, When a call had gone badly by the particular way, he set his pen down when he returned to his desk. She handled things before he knew they needed handling. She disappeared before he thought to say thank you. This was not a complaint. It was simply the shape of the arrangement, and she had accepted that shape because she was good at it, genuinely, quietly good, and because there had always been a particular satisfaction in a system that ran without friction, even when no one looked closely enough to understand why. What that had cost her, she had stopped calculating somewhere around the end of year 2. She sat at her desk now and looked at her screen. The office had settled into the particular quiet of late evenings, the kind where the building's hum dropped a register and the light above her desk felt smaller than it did during the day. Through the glass walls of the corridor, she could see Jae-hoon and Min still at the table, Jae-hoon's head bent over the documents she had delivered, Min saying something she couldn't hear. She looked at her screen for a moment. Then she opened a blank document. The cursor blinked. She placed her hands on the keyboard and typed, "Dear Mr. Kang, please accept this letter as formal notice of my resignation from the position of Executive Secretary, effective." She stopped. Read it back, sat with it longer than she meant to. Then she closed it without saving. The screen returned to her desktop, organized, clean, every folder exactly where it should be, the same as it always was. Not yet. She didn't know what yet meant or when it would come, but her hands had known what to type before she had decided to type it. And that, she understood, meant something had already changed quietly and probably for good. The change was not dramatic. That was the thing about it. Zara did not come in late. She did not make errors. She did not give Jae-hoon anything concrete to point to, nothing he could address the way he addressed problems, which was directly, efficiently, and without revisiting them. She simply became slightly more professional, and that slight degree of difference turned out to be the entire distance between a room feeling inhabited and a room feeling empty. The coffee she had always left on the corner of his desk at 8:15 stopped appearing. Not because she refused. If he had asked, she would have made it. He never asked. He had never needed to ask. That was precisely the point. The briefing notes she used to annotate by hand, small flags in the margins, a question mark beside anything she thought he should push back on, an asterisk next to figures Min tended to underestimate, arrived clean now. Accurate, thorough, and entirely without her in them. She answered everything he said with full, correct sentences. "Yes, Mr. Kang. I'll have that ready by 3, understood." Nothing beyond what was asked, nothing that sounded like Zara, he noticed on the second day. He said nothing because he could not locate what precisely he was noticing. There was no complaint available to him. She was doing her job. She was doing it perfectly. That was the problem he couldn't name, that it felt like a careful performance of correctness rather than the real thing, and he had apparently, without realizing it, learned the difference between the two. He tried once to restore whatever the normal had been. He stopped at her desk on his way back from a call and asked what she thought about the liability clause in the Singapore contracts. The kind of question he had always asked her because her instinct on legal language was faster and more reliable than half the lawyers on retainer. She looked at the clause he indicated and gave him a precise, professional answer. Correct. Comprehensive. Delivered without a single unnecessary word. Then she returned to her screen. He stood there a moment longer than he needed to. Then he walked back to his office. On the 4th evening, he was the last one in the building. This was not unusual. What was unusual was the quality of the silence. The office had always been quiet after hours, but there was a particular quality to it now that he didn't have a framework for, something that sat differently than ordinary quiet, that had a shape he couldn't quite account for. He sat at his desk and looked through his open door at the corridor beyond. Zara's desk, her chair pushed in evenly, her screen dark, everything in its correct place. He had never once thought about what it felt like to work late after she had already gone. It turned out it felt like something was missing, something he had never thought to name because he had never imagined he would need to. He had made this trip 4 times with Zara. He knew that without having to count 4 annual conferences, 4 sets of back-to-back meetings compressed into 3 days, 4 long evenings in hotel suites with documents spread across every available surface and room service ordered late, because neither of them had remembered to stop for dinner. It had always had a particular rhythm, this trip. He had never thought to be grateful for that rhythm until he arrived at the airport and found that it was gone. Zara was already at the gate when he got there, which was normal. What was not normal was that she was 3 rows back from where they usually sat, her carry-on already overhead, her tablet already open. She looked up when he approached, gave him a small, professional nod, and returned to her screen. He stood there for a moment, then continued to his seat at the front of the cabin. She had booked herself into economy. He stared at the seat assignment on his boarding pass for longer than it warranted. Then he sat down and opened his laptop and did not think about it. He told himself this for the duration of the 4-hour flight. At the hotel, she had reserved separate rooms on different floors. She presented this as a logistical decision, more practical for the schedule, easier to move between meetings, and delivered it in the tone she had been using all week, which was correct and professional and gave him nothing to push back against. He took his key. She took hers. The elevator opened and she stepped in without checking whether he was behind her. The conference itself was manageable. She was flawless in every meeting, the way she always was, documents ready before they were asked for, the right name recalled at the right moment, a quiet word in his ear before one session that reframed his entire approach to the afternoon negotiation. He won the room. He always won the room when Zara had prepared him for it. He had stopped noticing that these 2 facts were connected. She called him sir 3 times before noon. Each time the word landed like a door being pulled shut from the inside. That evening he ordered dinner out of habit, her usual, alongside his, without thinking. He stood at her door with the takeout bag and knocked twice. There was a long pause, then her voice came through, muffled and slow with sleep. "I'm sorry, I already turned in. Long day." He stood in the corridor holding the bag. Through the door, silence. He waited for something, he wasn't sure what, and then he walked back to his own room and sat at the table with both meals in front of him and the Singapore skyline beyond the window and the particular company of a man who was only now beginning to understand the difference between someone being present and someone choosing to be. He ate alone. He left her portion on the table in case she woke up hungry. She didn't knock. He noticed the window from the corridor. Zara's room was 2 floors below his, and he had no reasonable explanation for why he was on her floor at 11:30 at night, except that he had looked down from his balcony and seen it, her window pushed wide open, the Singapore air coming through cold and damp from the rain that had moved in after dinner. She had always run warm, kept windows open longer than was practical. He had learned this across 4 years of shared working spaces without ever registering it as something he knew. He had her spare key card because she had given it to him on the first day, the way she always did on these trips, in case there were documents that needed retrieving while she was in a session. He used it without thinking much about it. The room was dark when he entered, lit only by the city coming through the open window. He crossed toward it quietly. Then her phone rang. She stirred on the bed and reached for it before he could move, and he stepped back without thinking behind the wall of the entryway, pressed flat, not breathing as she answered. "Hey." Her voice was different, slower, warm in a way that arrived without effort. I know, I was going to call you earlier." A man's voice came through the speaker, low and easy. Jae-hoon could not make out the words, but he could hear the tone of them, comfortable, familiar, the cadence of 2 people who had been talking to each other for a long time. Zara laughed. It was not a sound he recognized. Not because he had never heard her laugh, he had occasionally in passing, but because this version of it was unguarded in a way he had never heard from her. It came from somewhere she didn't manage or monitor. It came from somewhere she felt safe. "Marcus, stop." She was still smiling, he could hear it. "Did you eat? You always forget to eat when you're on deadline," more from the other end. She laughed again, quieter this time, and said something he couldn't catch. Jae-hoon stood against the wall and did not move. He counted. He was not certain why, there was nothing useful about counting, but he counted anyway. 22 minutes from the first laugh to the end of the call. 22 minutes of Zara being entirely, freely herself in a way she had not been with him in weeks, possibly longer than weeks. Possibly he was beginning to understand, much longer than that. When her breathing evened out again, he crossed to the window and pulled it closed, quietly, carefully. Then he let himself out the way he had come in. He rode the elevator back to his floor and sat in his room without turning on the lights. Marcus asked if she had eaten. The thought sat in his chest in a way he had no clean framework for. He had ordered her dinner that evening and left it on a table. He had not, in 4 years, once thought to ask. He lost the thread twice during the morning panel. Both times he found it again before anyone noticed, or before anyone except Zara noticed, who caught his eye across the table the second time with an expression that was professionally neutral and said everything. He pulled himself back into the room and finished the session the way he always finished sessions, which was well, because the version of himself that closed deals was muscle memory by now and did not require his full attention to operate. The problem was where his attention was going instead. He was watching Zara work, and he could not seem to stop. It was not new information that she was good at this. He had always known she was good at this in the abstract way that you knew things you had stopped actually seeing. But something about the past 4 days had stripped that abstraction away, and now he was watching her with the particular attention of a man who had misplaced something and was only now understanding what it was. The way she managed the room without appearing to manage it. The way she positioned herself slightly to the left during presentations so she could read both the speaker and the audience simultaneously. The way she had a document ready before the request for it was finished. The way 3 different attendees had approached her during the afternoon break with questions they should have been directing to him, and she had answered 2 of them completely and redirected the third with enough precision that the man had left looking satisfied rather than corrected. He watched all of it. He should have been doing other things. He watched it anyway. The session ended at 4:30. The room began to clear. Jae-hoon was gathering his materials when he registered. At the edge of his attention, a man lingering beside Zara at the far end of the table. Senior, well-dressed. The kind of man who occupied space with the easy confidence of someone who had not been told no recently enough for it to register as a possibility. He was saying something to Zara with a smile that Jae-hoon did not like. Then he reached into his jacket for his phone. Jae-hoon was across the room in 3 steps. He didn't examine the decision. It was not a decision. He placed himself at Zara's side, extended his hand to the man and said something smooth and final about following up through the correct channels. The man read his face, made a brief calculation and excused himself. Zara waited until he was gone. Then she turned. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She simply looked at him with the expression of someone who had prepared for exactly this moment and listed, calmly and in order, the names of 3 women, an investor, a partner, a consultant whose firm had still been in contract negotiations, with whom Jae-hoon had allowed professional lines to dissolve entirely at his own convenience. He opened his mouth. She picked up her portfolio and walked out. Jae-hoon stood in the empty conference room. The city sat pale and wide beyond the windows. He stayed there for a long time, turning over every defense he had available, and ran out of all of them before he reached the door. He knocked on her door at 7 with nothing prepared. No opening, no strategy, no version of himself that had thought this through and arrived at a conclusion. Just the fact of him in the corridor, having stood outside his own room for 20 minutes unable to locate a reason to stay in it. She opened the door already changed, her expression doing the careful work of someone who had not decided yet what they were willing to give the evening. She looked at him. He asked if she would walk with him. Not for work, he said, just to walk. She considered him for a moment that was longer than comfortable. Then she reached for her jacket. They found the rooftop restaurant by accident, or by the kind of accident that was really just walking until something felt right. It was small and warm, strung with low lights, open to the sky on 3 sides with the city spread below in every direction. The kind of place that existed. Slightly outside ordinary time. They took a table at the edge and ordered without discussing it, and for a while the evening simply held them without requiring anything. She told him about the worst business trip she had taken before she came to work for him, a conference in a city she refused to name, a hotel that had lost her reservation. 3 days spent navigating everything in a language she had learned specifically for the trip, only to discover the entire panel had been conducted in English. She told it well, with the timing of someone who had refined the story over several retellings, and he laughed genuinely, completely, the kind that arrived before he could consider whether to allow it. She smiled at the sound of it, just briefly. Then she looked back at the city. He said something about the Singapore skyline that was more honest than he intended, something about how it looked different when you were sitting still in it instead of moving through it on the way to somewhere else. She glanced at him and said nothing, but the quality of her silence was different from the silence of the past week. Then he asked. He told her about the window, about the keycard in the cold air and standing against the wall for 22 minutes listening to a version of her he had not known existed. He told her, without softening it, that the man on the phone had asked if she had eaten, and that this small thing had stayed with him in a way he did not entirely have language for. He told her he would not mind being that person if the position was available. The table went quiet. Zara looked at him for a long moment. Then she set her glass down with the careful precision of someone placing evidence on a table. She told him she had been at the glass door. She told him she had heard everything. She said his words back to him, "Not my type, just my secretary," quietly, without performance, the way you repeated something you had spent days carrying without anywhere to put it down. She told him she didn't believe him. Not because she thought he was lying, but because she thought he was a man who was unaccustomed to losing, and that what he was feeling now was less about her and more about the unfamiliar weight of being the one left behind. She told him she was not a prize that became visible the moment someone else reached for it. She did not cry. Her voice did not waver. She simply looked at him across the table with the clear, steady expression of a woman who had already survived the worst part of this and was not interested in performing the rest of it for his benefit. Jae-hoon had no answer that was good enough. He knew it before he opened his mouth. They stayed at the table anyway. The city spread below them, indifferent and bright. Everything between them remained exactly where she had placed it, out in the open, unresolved and impossible to return to the place it had been before tonight. He knew before he checked. The suite had a particular quality when Zara was in it, small sounds that he had never consciously registered until they were absent. The faint movement of someone else existing in shared space. Without it, the silence had a shape that woke him before his alarm did. The note was on the table beside the coffee maker. A single sheet, folded once, his name written on the outside in her handwriting, precise, unhurried, the same hand that had signed 4 years of documents on his behalf. "I need the space more than I need this conversation right now. See you back home. Don't be dramatic about it." He read it twice. Then he set it down and stood at the window for a while, looking at the city in the early morning light, and told himself she was right, that she needed space. That this was the reasonable thing and he was going to be reasonable about it. He told himself this on the flight home in the window seat with the seat beside him empty. He told himself this in the car from the airport and again in the elevator up to his office, and a third time when he walked through the door and stopped, without meaning to, in front of her desk. The chair was pushed in. The screen was dark. The small succulent she kept on the corner of her desk, which she had once told him in passing required almost no maintenance, which was why it was the only plant she trusted herself with, had been moved to the windowsill where it would get more light. She had thought of the plant before she left. He went into his office and sat down. On his desk, positioned precisely in the center, was a white envelope. He opened it. 1 page, formally formatted, signed at the bottom in the same hand as the note. 2 weeks' notice, effective immediately. Personal reasons. He read it once, put it in the drawer, did not open the drawer again. The next 4 days were the kind he did not intend to repeat. A temporary assistant arrived on the second morning and spent the duration flinching every time he spoke at a volume above conversational. He approved 3 documents he should have reviewed more carefully and had to send corrections the following morning. He called Zara once. She answered on the 3rd ring, told him she was fine, told him she needed more time, and ended the call before he had found the thing he actually wanted to say. He sat looking at his phone afterward for longer than he would admit to anyone. Min arrived on the fourth day without notice, the way he had always operated since university, and walked into Jae-hoon's office to find him at his desk surrounded by 4 cups of cold coffee and a stack of papers that were visibly unread. Min sat down across from him, looked at the desk, looked at him. "Stop performing grief in this office," he said, with the patience of a man who had run out of it, "and go find the woman." Jae-hoon looked at the drawer where the resignation letter was sitting. Then he stood up. He knew the neighborhood from 4 years of dropping her nearby, close enough that she could walk the last few minutes, because she had never once asked to be taken all the way and he had never once thought to offer. He knew this about himself now in a way he hadn't a week ago. There were a number of things he knew about himself now in that way. She opened the door in a loose sweater and wide-leg trousers, her hair natural and unstyled, the way he had never seen it in 4 years of shared offices and business trips and late evenings. She looked at him with the careful expression of someone who had already considered this possibility and had not yet decided what to do with it. He spoke before she could redirect him. "I'm not here to win," he said. "I know that's what you think this is. I need you to know it is." She said nothing. She leaned against the doorframe and waited. "I spent 4 days walking past your desk," he said. "Every time I picked up my phone to tell you something and then remembered. I couldn't close a single meeting or read a brief or sit in that office without the fact of your absence making itself known in a way I had no framework for." He paused. "I don't say things like that. You know I don't say things like that." "I know," she said quietly. "It was not an invitation. It was just true. I have been in some version of love with you for longer than I have any clean way of measuring." He said it the way he had rehearsed it in the car, which was without rehearsal, which was the only way it was going to come out honest. "I dressed it as indifference because indifference was safer and required nothing from me. And what I said through that glass," he stopped. "That was what frightened men say when they are trying to convince themselves of something that isn't true. I am not proud of it. I will not ask you to minimize it." Zara looked at him for a long moment. The hallway was quiet around them. "I'm not a problem you get to solve," she said. "I need you to understand that before anything else. I know. And I'm not coming back as your secretary." "I know that too," she studied him. Then she said, "I've been planning something for months before any of this." She paused as if deciding how much to give him. "A studio for Black women and women of color. Natural hair, skincare, wellness, a space built on the idea that they have never needed to change anything about themselves to be worth seeing." Her voice was steady and certain in a way it had never needed to be in his office. "I was going to tell you after the trip, before everything." He said, "Show me." She looked at him. The careful expression shifted almost imperceptibly, not open, not yet, but no longer entirely closed. She stepped back from the door. The apartment was warm and lived in, full of the quiet evidence of a person who actually inhabited their space. She returned from the bedroom with a rolled document and a folder thick with notes and spread them across the floor without ceremony. Floor plans, supplier lists, a color palette pinned to a mood board photograph, a business plan tabbed and annotated in her handwriting. Jae-hoon sat down on the floor across from it all. He looked at the plans. Then he looked at her. "Tell me what you need," he said. And for the first time in 4 years, he asked the right question and stayed completely, entirely quiet for all of her answer. The line formed before she unlocked the door. Jae-hoon saw it from the back of the studio where he had positioned himself early and quietly, in the way he had learned to occupy her spaces, present without requiring acknowledgement, there without making it about the fact of being there. 12 people by 9 o'clock, 20 by 9:15. The kind of turnout that did not happen by accident. That was the result of 8 months of work he had watched from a careful distance and said very little about, because she had not asked him to say anything, and he had finally learned the difference between support and commentary. He had not funded it. He had known better than to offer. What he had done was make one introduction, a contractor he trusted, offered without framing it as a favor, and otherwise shown up in the ways she asked for and stayed out of the ways she didn't. He had driven her to the space at 7 in the morning twice, when she needed a second pair of eyes on the layout, and said nothing, except what she asked him to say. He had sat across from her supplier spreadsheets on 3 separate evenings and asked questions and listened to all of the answers. This, it turned out, was what she had always needed most. It was not a complicated thing to give. He had simply never thought to give it before. The studio was warm and considered in the way that only spaces built by people who understood their purpose from the inside could be. Wide windows, lighting that was honest rather than flattering, shelves lined with products she had spent 8 months sourcing and testing and vetting personally, organized without hierarchy, labeled without apology. A chalkboard above the reception desk that said, in her handwriting, something he had read 3 times and not found a way to improve upon. He watched her move through the room on opening morning and thought about a glass door and the word he had said through it, and felt the particular weight of a man who understood, fully and without mitigation, what carelessness had nearly cost him. Min found out about them within the week, arriving at Jae-hoon's apartment for dinner, and taking approximately 4 seconds to read the situation before producing the expression of a man whose prediction had finally, at significant delay, been validated. He said nothing beyond what was necessary. This was how they operated, the 3 of them, in the months that followed, openly among the people who mattered and without performance anywhere else. 18 months after the studio opened on a Tuesday evening in her apartment, Zara sat across the table from him with flour on her sleeve from something she had been testing for a client event and a half-finished cup of tea beside her laptop. She was reading something. He was supposed to be reading something. He was watching her instead. She looked up. "What?" He reached into his jacket pocket. "Nothing," he said first, then, "everything." She went still. He set the ring on the table between them, no ceremony, no speech, no performance. Just a man placing something in front of the woman he should have seen clearly a long time ago and had spent every day since trying to deserve. Zara looked at it, then at him. "You have been," she said, "the most difficult education of my life." "Yes," he agreed. She picked up the ring. And that's a wrap on this one. If you made it all the way to this ending, you already know what to do. Hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me what your favorite moment was. Was it Tokyo, the ice skating, the bakery? Let me know below. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? There are more stories exactly like this one waiting for you. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another one. I'll see you in the next story. Please support by subscribing and commenting what you enjoyed about the story and where you're watching from.